Hello and welcome back to another panel on Spotlight Indie's Great Big Indie Weekend. I am back with the lovely LL MacRae along with a few other amazing panelists, and we're here to talk not about dragons but about self-publishing and the costs and the fact that only rich people write books, right? No. So I'm here to discuss that and the pitfalls and the tips and all those kind of lovely things with all these lovely people. So before we dive in, let's introduce you to our lovely panelists. And as is my want, I'm going to go around clockwise, as I always do, to introduce everybody. So, Lauren, would you like to start and introduce yourself and let people know who you are and about your books?
Hi, everyone. My name's Lauren. I'm a British fantasy author, and I write under the name LL MacRae. I primarily write epic fantasy, lots of dragons, multi-POV, adventure, underdogs, magic, all the fun stuff. And thank you so much for having me again. It's great to be back on another panel.
Of course, we love having you over here. Tim, now with you, could you please give everyone a quick intro to yourself?
Yep, happy to. I'm Tim Hardie, so I'm also a UK-based fantasy author. I write what I describe as dark epic fantasy, usually with a Viking theme, lots of politics, lots of clan warfare, a bit of dragons if you wait around and stick around with the series long enough. So that's a little tip there. And yeah, I'm just happy to be on the show tonight. It's really good.
Perfect. And Simon, what about yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Simon Kewin. I'm also UK-based writer of, I guess I alternate between fantasy and science fiction. So dragons show up in maybe half of my books. Currently working on some science fiction books. Just finished a fantasy one.
Perfect. So a nice wide remit across the speculative genres, although we're all nicely based in the lovely drizzly at the moment, UK. So the first question we have is, the myth that or the topic you want to talk about is the myth that you have to be rich to publish a book. And I think we could all agree that that's not true. So what else do you need? What are the other kind of qualities that will be useful rather than just having bucket loads of cash, although we'd all want that?
Shall I make a start on that?
You absolutely can. Yeah, please do.
Because I was thinking about the questions that we were going to discuss, and it occurred to me that although you don't have to have lots of money, what you do have to have is quite a bit of time and the piece to kind of do the writing. So it can take a long time, obviously, to write a book. It doesn't cost a lot of money, but finding the time and the space to do it, can be the challenge, I think, more so than the financial cost. And then that leads you into what you could be doing with that time, and maybe, you could be gainfully employed doing something else. But that's another matter. So I think for me, it was writing my books. It was time rather than, certainly, there's no particular cost to it. Certainly producing the book, the covers and editing differently, but it's not an expensive thing to do. Don't know what anyone else.
I think that's I mean, what do people think about that? Do you think time is the most important resource rather than anything else?
100%, yeah. Especially if you're still working full time, or if you have a family to take care of, social obligations, general adulting life with all of the 1,001 things that we will have to do. I think when it comes to publishing, so if you actually do get to a point where you have the end in your manuscript, publishing itself, it kind of depends what you want to do. I always say, do you just want to publish a book to say, yes, I've done it? In which case you can do that in 10 minutes. It doesn't take very long to upload a manuscript to Amazon, create your own cover, that kind of thing. But if you actually want to sell books or make some money, either as, just a bit of side income, or if you actually want to go full time, then you will need to dedicate a large amount of cost into it. And as Simon said, that is probably going to be primarily time, because you'll need to do your research, you'll need to look into things, you need to figure out how you want to run the business, as it were. Cost always helps, like if you do have those buckets of money that Alex suggested, but time is going to be the number one resource, and you can get away with not spending very much money if you are willing to put in more time. So it kind of balances out that way. At least it did for me.
And I think it's interesting there. Sorry, Tim, if I can just hop on something that Lauren's mentioned. You said, the book says, whether you want to go full time or not. And I think that's also something to think about in terms of what you want to get out of it, because it's very easy to see all these, YouTubers or, influencers and success stories and think that that's the only option, is that you have to try and make a full-time living out, and you have to try and be a six-figure author is a sort of term that people use, and like a goal that they have. But you don't have to do that. If you just want to try and make enough money to go down to the pub every other week or something, that's also fine. Or try and make enough money to pay for a weekend away. Those are all worthy goals in and of themselves. So don't stress yourself out too much. Sorry, Tim, you look like you were going to say something as well.
Yeah, I've just switched onto the headset. So am I coming through okay audio wise still?
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Excellent. I can hear you now, which is also very helpful. Yeah, I think the whole point about time, absolutely, probably the most single, most important sort of thing to bring to it. I was probably writing creatively for about 15 years before I self-published, and I thought I spent a lot of time on it in that 15-year period. I had no idea. The last 5 years, I'm probably still a hobbyist, indie publisher effectively, because I still have a full-time job. I certainly I'm not paying the bills or anything really with what I'm currently doing. But yeah, just the level of time commitment, not just to get your book out there, but then also to do all the other things that connect readers to your book. Doing things like this, giving up an evening to have a chat with you lovely people. It's all time, isn't it? And I think if you're like you said, Lauren, if you're happy just to release and write for a hobby, and not that bothered about people finding out about it, it doesn't take all that much time and energy necessarily. But I think if you want to connect with readers, that bit for me, I probably spend more time on this stuff than I do actually writing the book, or at least 50-50. But it's a lot of the time, it feels a lot more like 80-20 in favour of all the other stuff that's not writing that we call writing as well. So yeah, I think you need to do it to take this seriously. You need to go in with that kind of mindset, I think.
I'd also add to that, like, in addition to knowing that you have to put time into it, which kind of you have to be patient, but being open to learning and being open to opportunities and being open to different things that might crop up. Because when you start this, I'm sure many of us have an idea of what it's going to entail and what we're going to do and how things are going to kind of like fall together. And very often it never goes to plan. So I think being open and able to kind of like pivot as needed and just say yes to opportunities that might crop up that you might not necessarily be even aware of at the beginning is really important. I tend to find that authors that either are enjoying it more or are more successful tend to be a bit more flexible in that regard, in terms of like how you approach things and your way of thinking, because we don't know what we don't know at the very beginning. So being open to that, I think, is really an important sort of quality to have.
Well, especially for small indie publishers and small indie writers, because you have that speed that you can apply to things, whereas the bigger publishers will have committees and board members to run these things by, so they will take months and however long to pivot. Whereas for somebody like us, if we saw something and then the next day we could be like, actually, yeah, I'm going to put my ebook on sale to coincide with X, or I'm going to just put a 20% discount on something. So I think that's a really important thing. In terms of time versus money, one of the other things we wanted to talk about on this panel is vanity publishing and vanity publishers. So in case people aren't necessarily really aware of that, of what those things are, which is probably the kind of those people who aren't necessarily aware that the vanity publishers exist are potentially the kind of people that vanity publishers are trying to prey on. So would anybody like to provide like a little explanation of what a vanity publisher is? Simon, would you like to?
I can have a stab. I mean, the approach we should always be taking is that money flows to the creator, to the writer, and
yeah.
Although it's not always that straightforward. The vanity publisher, the idea of them is that you pay them for them to publish your book for you. And I would say that it isn't just publishers as well. There seems to be a growing number of people who will try and get you to give them money to advertise your book and promote your book and manage your portfolio and all the rest of it. I mean, I get so many emails every day from people wanting to take my money from me to help me become a writer, you know. But there's a whole industry there of people who will take your money. And you know, it's difficult because some of the time you do want to spend money, like you do want to spend money on promotion perhaps, or you do want to get a good cover for your book, or you do want to pay an editor. So it isn't just a matter of you don't spend any money, but it's knowing what's legitimate and what's valid and what is a scam. And it isn't always, it's a bit of a grey area at times, I think. So you do have to be careful, which is why, you know, having groups like this and people you can check with, talk to, is very useful, I think.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. I think money flowing to the author is a critical part of any sort of publishing arrangement, whether you're indie or trad or hybrid. So I think anything where that's not the case needs to be treated with skepticism. And, you know, that's a different thing to paying for individual services you have requested because you need that particular area covering because you can't cover it yourself in the indie space, you know. So obviously there are costs, but I think particularly those, you know, vanity publishers that sort of offer to sort of like propel you to the next level. I think going back to you, I think it was you, Lauren, said earlier on about, you know, why you're doing this. You know, is it just the satisfaction of releasing a book, or you know, is it actually you want to be the next bestseller? And you've got to be really, really careful because actually a lot of this stuff is not in your control. Yeah. So I consider myself to be very successful at what I do, but by my own measures. And I think when you start to think of yourself, I will only be successful if I reach a bestseller list, or I'm only going to be successful if I'm living off this, you know, and looking at some of your, you know, your peers who've probably been doing this for 20 plus years. Anything that I think suggests there's a shortcut that if you just work with this individual, you'll be propelled to stardom. I would just say run for the hills and never look back, because those are the type of people you must avoid at all costs. So yeah, but they will prey on that dream, and it can be very subtle. And if you set your goals, I think a little wrong, or unrealistic goals, I suppose I mean really, you know, yes, you can make yourself vulnerable to that kind of scam and that kind of ploy.
Definitely. There's like, I understand the sentiment of people wanting a quick fix or a magic button, and this will make, you know, you will hit those goals if you just do this one thing. Like, I understand that, and that's why they're so good at preying on that. But in another way, a lot of newbie writers, we don't know what we don't know to begin with. We just know that, oh, if we self-publish, it's going to be a lot of work. I need to learn marketing, I need to learn promotion, I need to go to things, I need to show my face, and maybe I'm not super comfortable with doing that, or there's just a lot of sort of legwork in addition to writing, and often these companies will take all of that away from you, so you just need to worry about writing and nothing else, which can be very appealing to a lot of people, especially in the early sort of stages of their career. I mean, that's kind of what traditional publishers offer, and that's kind of one of the reasons why people like that, because you just need to write, you don't need to worry about any of the promo, although whether or not that's true these days, you know, is a whole other conversation. Yeah. But if you you know, you've put your heart and soul into a manuscript, you've been working on it for months or years, and then you submit it to what you think is a legitimate publisher, and it turns out that they're not, but you get a phone call from them, from a dedicated account manager, and they're really impressed with what you've done, and they can really see it going places. You get that validation. So not only do you have the I've passed the gatekeeper kind of mindset, but you also have, oh, and I don't need to worry about anything, just writing the next sequel and I'll take care of it. That's why it can be very easy to kind of fall into these trapped contracts, and you lose money, you lose rights, and you can kind of really shoot yourself in the foot. So I think just being aware that writing is hard work. Yes, the barrier to entry is low, but you still have to put in some kind of effort to make it the best that it can be. And if you have anyone trying to give you any kind of shortcut, like Tim said, whether that be like a quick fix and this is going to fix it for you, or I'm going to do all of the work for you so you don't have to worry, that's when you might want to start, just be aware of those little red flags, even though you might really, really want to believe it, kind of thinking with your head rather than your heart, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you've mentioned, these kind of contracts as well. And I've heard stories or talked to people where they've gone into these contracts with these vanity publishers who you have to pay them a stupendous amount of money to, or like, tens of £10,000 for them to publish your book, and they'll cover everything. And that sounds like a great deal. And then, they don't do a very good job of it, and they don't, do what you promised. They might promise X amount of sales, and then you also can't get out of that contract very easily because they, word it in such a way that's very beneficial to them. And yeah, so it's something to enter into with, if that is something you want, make sure very carefully that they are providing you the thing that they've promised, and that, as Simon said, that maybe you can find groups like on Spotlight Indie, or maybe the British Fantasy Society, communities of people who might be able to provide that sort of validation about whether or not these people can be approached and talked to or run away from.
Another really good resource is Writers Beware, where people who have had dealings with, it may not be a vanity publisher, it may be a rogue editor or proofreader or anyone that we might encounter. If they are not to be trusted, they'll be listed on Writers Beware. So if you do get an out of the blue email or phone call from any company, it's always worth double checking on there as well. If you maybe aren't part of these communities or don't want to ask in case you feel like, oh, maybe I've been tricked, that's a really good resource as well. And it's updated pretty regularly.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd
So
agree with all
that feels like a lot of...
The Alliance of Independent Authors is pretty good as well. Obviously, that's a paid membership, so that's maybe going against what we've just been saying. But they do have good knowledge of the pros and cons of some of these people. The other thing I'd say is, I guess it is possible that one day a genuine offer does come along that is too good to be true because your book's fantastic and somebody loves your book and wants to make you a best-selling author. So, stay open to that. Just don't get caught up if it sounds too good to be true. But don't just assume.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we touched on, the traditional publishers should have the model of money flowing to the author. So you shouldn't need to pay them any money to publish your book. They should be paying you.
Exactly. So yeah. I mean, the thing, what we were saying about the selling you big dreams as well. I mean, I'm actually a kind of a hybrid author, and I indie publish, but I also publish some books through a small press, and they're lovely people. They're kind of the opposite of a vanity press in that they tell me, we're doing this for love, and so the money flows to me, and they do the editing and the covers and so on. But there's no attempt to convince me that I'm going to be a millionaire from this or anything like that. So it's very obvious that's not a vanity press because they're paying me.
Yeah, I think that's really important that you bring that up, actually, as we've been decrying these vanity presses, that, there's a lot of indie presses out there and very small presses that are teams of very few people, but they absolutely do it for the love of storytelling and for the genre. So, don't let that put you, as I say, just scrutinize these offers. In theory, all the money should always be flowing to you. You shouldn't have to pay for anything like that. For somebody to do one of these things, if it's an indie press, they should still be offering you money, or at least not asking you to pay anything up front.
Yeah, agreed.
So that all sounds very scary. So what are the pros of self-publishing? Obviously, we all must consider that there are pros to self-publishing. So what would you consider them? Tim, do you want to maybe start us off with some of the pros?
Yeah, and there are lots of them. So I think, for a lot of people, indie publishing is their first go-to model. I sort of straddle the sort of two different areas, because I suppose I'm an agented author, so I am exploring the options of traditional publishing as well, and I don't think there's any problem with doing that. But I think that the major advantage for me in the world of indie is just that full editorial control, and full creative control as well. So I think those are two big elements really that are kind of in your favour. You don't want to I suppose I don't think you should ever try and write to market and try and catch a wave. I think it's really important to write what you want to write, but there are no limits to that. So I think for a lot of indie authors, they feel they write in a genre that actually probably isn't that appealing to trad. Well, guess what? You can still release to the audience that wants that particular style of book or that particular subgenre, because you can put it out yourself. So I think that full creative control is probably the biggest single plus for me.
Lauren, what about you? What are your favourite pros?
Well, yeah, I mean, control is probably the main thing, but kind of coupled with that would be the speed. So if you have an idea or you have a completed manuscript and you wanted to publish that yourself, you could get it up online for sale tonight, tomorrow. Whereas with a trad, it would be months, if not years. I think one of the really major pros is the sense of community that you get as an indie author. I think that the stigma of self-publishing is being chipped away bit by bit each year. And I think more readers are not just willing to read a self-published book, but actively looking for self-published books. And they know that they're going to get, as Tim said, stories that maybe a mainstream publisher wouldn't be interested in. So they're going to get something a bit more unique, perhaps a bit more diverse, scratch more particular itches in a niche that you would get with mainstream books. And when you are writing books that people love, that sense of community can really, really build around you. Like there are contests and in indie, like the SPFBO is a big one if you write speculative. And the amount of people that kind of want to get behind you and cheer you on and share your successes and shout from the rooftops if they've loved your book, that's something that I don't feel that you would get as much with trad, because there's a bit of a barrier between you and your end reader. I know they do tours and interviews and things like that, but it's never quite as sort of one-to-one as it can be with indie. Like, people can email me directly and it's not going to go through an agent, or it's not going to go through a PA or a marketing team. It's those one-on-one connections. And I think being indie gets you so close because you are part of that community anyway. And that's a really great feeling. So when you have days where maybe the words aren't flowing, or maybe you've had a bad review come through, or you just feel like giving it all up and never writing again, that sense of community and spirit can be a really, really great support.
Absolutely. Definitely the indie community is one of the most positive and friendly, as well as, the speculative fiction I find community as well. Simon, what are your favourite pros of self-publishing?
Well, I'd agree with everything that Lauren and Tim have said, but I guess I'd touch on something that Lauren said previously about the ability to react quickly, do things like publicity and promotions. So, with my books that I've indie published, I have complete freedom to set prices if I want, make them free for a week, put them on price promotion if I want, do whatever I like with them, give them away to people as I see fit. Whereas if I'm published through a publisher, I don't really have that control over that. They control all of that, and I can kind of suggest things in my particular situation, but I don't have control over that. They do what they think's best. So it's really nice just to be able to think, well, I've got these books, and you see an opportunity, like Lauren said, where something you hadn't heard about, suddenly there's this opportunity to get your books into a particular promotion or a bundle or whatever it may be. You can just do it at the drop of a hat without having to go through weeks and months of committees or whatever it may be. So it's the speed of it, really. I think it's nice.
I just wanted to add on. No, you go first, Tim.
Oh no, we're too polite. We can't carry on. I was just going to say, I think that speed factor also helps with the community factor as well. So I think that the fact that writers can sort of almost like reveal their progress in real time, and you can almost say, I've finished, and literally you can be releasing next week if you really want to. I think a lot of readers buy into that immediacy rather than some of the delays that come with trad. Understand why, it's a completely different business model, but I think it just does create a slight disconnect from that perspective. So yeah, I think that community is really good, and that community of readers is also really engaged as well. When you get some of these guys discovering your stuff and then really pushing it in a way that, with frankly, more enthusiasm than I can muster up sometimes, it's really nice to see. But they can see that happening in real time, and I think that helps strengthen the connection between writer and reader in the indie space. Sorry, Lauren, you were going to make your point, weren't you?
No, it's funny. It's funny how a lot of the pros are kind of all interconnected, really, because if you think about the speed of pushing things through and being able to sort of react to requests and marketing tactics, as well as the community that you have. One thing that you do have as an indie that you maybe have much less chance as a traditionally published author are different formats and different editions. I know that, like, for example, Janny Vert's Mistwraith series, they've only just done the audiobook and only just of book one, and only because they've been demanding it for years and years and years. And another of my favorite authors, Jen Williams, has only just been able to get a hardcover version of some of her books because she's not on the priority list for her publisher for those editions. Whereas we as indies, we are able to do that. I know it's kind of goes against the cost element of this panel, but when you have people that are really wanting a particular format, you can create a hardcover version, you can create an audiobook as and when you choose, rather than, oh well, this other author on our list is slightly better than you, so they're going to get the marketing budget for this year. Whereas with you, all of your budget, whatever that might be, is for you, and you can do that in whichever way you want. So being able to create different formats or editions, through Kickstarter and crowdfunding and stuff like that, has really opened the doors to being able to create an edition for everyone. And the only limit really is you and your creativity, rather than somebody else deciding where on the priority list you fall. And that's another big one.
It's back to that point about time again as well, isn't it? So like I did a Kickstarter last year to produce my first audiobook, and that was a hell of a project, actually. I massively underestimated what that would entail. And, whilst I have no regrets about doing it, again, I think, yes, time is probably your most critical resource for all of this. But like you say, Lauren, you can spend it wherever you want, and you decide those priorities rather than somebody arbitrarily deciding it for you. So, yeah, I think it's a massive plus.
Yeah.
I think it's also nice that you can just not spend any time doing it if you don't want to.
Yes,
exactly. If you just want to write this year, or for all time, and produce your books, put them out, let them very slowly attract a readership or not, as the case may be. But you don't have to do any of this stuff. If you enjoy doing it or you want to do it, that's fine. But sometimes I do very little of this kind of engaging publicity type stuff. And that's okay too, because it's entirely up to me how I do it. There's no publisher cracking the whip and saying I have to have this manuscript in 6 months' time, or whatever it may be.
Yeah, there's no right or wrong way to do it, and you can do it one way for one book and a different way for a different book as well. That's the freedom of being indie.
Yeah. And I think flipping that round as well, don't put yourself under pressure to do all those things. I think a lot of people feel like they must do all these things. And I think I was probably a bit guilty of some of that behavior when I first kind of moved into that, social media space. But actually, I've realized I need to scale back on my projects. I need to focus on one thing and do it really well, close it and move on to the next. And I think I'm probably guilty in 23 and 24. Of actually probably spreading myself too thin. So, sort of make sure that you're doing what you want to do. Because, again, you've got full control over that. So, do those bits that bring you joy. And if you don't want to do all those bits, no one's going to really tell you off. Or, you're only accountable to yourself at the end of the day. So make sure you've got your priorities straight, I suppose.
Yeah, it kind of goes back to that whole there's no magic button and there's no quick fix, and not comparing yourself to, I think it was you, Tim, that said, somebody else that could have been doing this for like 20 years. You don't need to be like, okay, well, this is what they've done, therefore I must do exactly those things in order to achieve what they have achieved, because it's really not like that at all. And what's the saying? Comparison is the thief of joy as well.
Yes.
So you have to do what works for you at that particular time, and that can be as much or as little as you want, or as needed, depending on the situation, the project.
I think as well as all, I mean, I agree absolutely with all of that, but also it does give you scope for for how you divide your time. So if I write for a couple of hours, I may decide that I don't want to write anymore that day because my brain's empty, emptier, I suppose. But if I've got another hour, I could spend it. I mean, I have a big maybe we all do. I've got massive lists of things I keep meaning to do, and publicity things I mean to do, and formatting I need to do, and places to upload my books. So I can do that for an hour, which is a bit more mindless, but sort of satisfying in its own way. And I just pick and choose between those things as I have time or as I wish, which is nice as well.
I think also just saying of all these things that that you can do swiftly or that your publisher won't let you do, and that kind of thing is that like as a try published author, you wouldn't necessarily be able to sort of sell your own books in person, or you might have to, but there would be some hoops to jump through. And I know, Lauren, you do a lot of that, and it's something that I'm looking into now as well. And you can just go and that sort of builds on that connection. And these are things that you can look at. So that would hopefully make you some money sort of immediately. And one of the other pros to self-publishing is that one of the ways that you can get your print books is these print on demand services. So they only print one book. If a customer orders a book, they get printed a book and they get sent a book. So you don't have to buy 500 books at once. So, and you don't even have to, pay for that because it will obviously come out of whatever somebody has paid for. So you could just print 10, 20, 30 books if you can, while you're going to sell in person. You don't have to do that again, Lauren. I know that you have big print runs when you do your physical books as well. So you've still got the same options. And those, I think is it Clays that you use in the UK?
I used to use Clays. I now use CPI. So you can spend nothing, or you can spend lots of money. The spectrum is vast.
Yeah, and those printers that you're using are the same printers that the traditional publishers are using. So just because you're going indie, if that's something that you want to have your book published at the same place as your favorite authors, then you can absolutely, your favorite trad public authors, you absolutely can do that. But there are options and ways that you can do that without spending any money. I've recently set up, and I know Lauren, you sell direct as well. But I've recently set up a direct sales thing on my website, but again, with that print on demand, so somebody can order it off the website. I basically just flow the money through to the company called Book Vault, and they will print it and send it. And the customer pays for the postage as well. So I don't technically have to spend any money for that. I just get the the difference, which is actually a lot more than if you were a traditionally published author as well.
That's probably the biggest pro that we haven't mentioned, that you earn more from your books sales than you would if you were traditionally published. I can't believe we've got to like half an hour in and we didn't actually mention the fact that you can actually make more money as an indie. Obviously discounting advances and whatnot, but I mean like per book, and you can diversify that in a lot of ways, because you have one manuscript, you can sell that as an ebook, an audiobook, a paperback, a hardback. You can do your own merch with it and create your own book swag from it, and you can do all of these things with your own IP in the ways that you want to do. And then like with the community, you can talk to them, what do they want, and figure out demand. And then you're not even necessarily paying up front for things if people are more than happy to pre-order them and support you that way. So there are so many ways that you can diversify an income with like one product that you've worked on, and instead of being kind of like limited to whatever a publisher would choose to do for you. But
and you can see, as you said, that how all these things feed together, in that you see what the community wants because you've built this lovely community, and then you could do this print on demand merchandise, like just a t-shirt. If they've got a favorite character that's got a favorite saying or something, you see a lot of I see kind of some YA romance type authors, they get these audiences that like that kind of stuff, so they have these t-shirts, or like as I say, all this merchandise is also print on demand, so you don't have to sort of buy 500 baseball caps and then have 450 sat around until you can sell the rest of them. So I think all this stuff really does play very nicely together. And before we move on, has anybody got anything else they wanted to sort of say on those kind of topics? Because as you say, I'm conscious we've been going for about half an hour, and we've still got some other things we want to touch on.
Cool. Yeah, I was just going to add on that. I think that there's a lot of focus on release, isn't there, in terms of the costs of getting to that place? But actually, I think it is very important to remember it is a sunk cost once. And then, as like Lauren said, you've actually got the multiple opportunities to actually, make money from that product. So I've recently got into audiobooks, for example. So that's still a slow start for me, but I've then switched that to, I've now got a direct sales option effectively with somebody else. Audiobook Empire's handling that for me, but I've got that as an option in my locker. So I think again, there's a bit of there is a cost to doing this. There absolutely is a cost. You're in full control of that, but you've got to set yourself a budget. But then you've also got to have that eye to, you need to think about how you're then going to get those books in the hands of readers, and the most cost-effective way of doing that as well, so that you get the biggest slice of royalty. You have got to think about this from a business angle too, and I think that offset is something you can recoup. You can recoup it over a year if you have a great launch, but you can also recoup it over 5 years or even 10 years. Actually, you will eventually recoup that investment as long as you've been sensible at the outset, really.
There's no sell by date with books. There's no best before.
No.
Yeah. But yeah, that leads us very nicely into the costs of self-publishing. So there are costs involved, but these will be usually, certainly at the up front to start with. But you don't necessarily need to spend lots of stuff. So before we move into sort of how much you might need to spend or can save money on certain things, what are the key things that you think people should be looking to spend money on or would look to spend money on, and whether or not that's true? Simon, do you have any ideas for us on that front?
I mean, I have very few ideas about anything really, but the obvious two I would think are editing and covers. So, writing the book is a matter of time and effort and inspiration and whatever else, but and you can self-edit to a considerable degree, I think, depending on how active your inner editor is. Mine is very active, but at some point I would say you need the input from a third party, from an editor, so that and that could be somebody you then have to pay, or it could be somebody, which I've done in the past, or it could be somebody that you have some kind of quid pro quo with. I mean, I've had people edit for me, and I've worked out helped on their websites, for example. So that there can be a cost, but it doesn't have to be huge. And then the other thing is covers. Obviously, now there's a great skill to producing covers, and it's very easy to produce bad covers, I would say. But at the same time, there's a lot of really fantastic artwork out there that you can buy for quite a small amount. If you can find the right image for your book or series of books, you can find an image. You can fairly easily slap some lettering on it using free software. And I've done it not for novels, but I've done it for novellas. I've produced a cover in half an hour, literally, and it looks good to me, and I'm happy with it. And that didn't cost me anything, or maybe £5 for the underlying image, So those are the two I'd say. I don't know what the others think.
Yeah. Any extensions? Any raises on editing and covers being the most important? Anything else that you think would be good to pay for?
Yeah, they're definitely important. Definitely, a book should have those things. I'd say that. So I think don't skimp on them. But yeah, there are different ways, like Simon says, to potentially, finding a cost-effective way to do that. Again, especially when you're starting out, you might well, as you get further into this, if you're on book like 10, book 20, you're making a serious, stab at a career at this, you may well want to outsource a lot more of that, just to increase the rapidity of release, things like that. I think one thing to think about here is it is worth outsourcing certain things if you're not very good at them, because they will take you an inordinate amount of time to do. So I think about your skill set, think about what's important, and I think on editing and covers in particular, you really need to ask yourself the question: can you do this yourself? Are you a good graphic designer or not? Have you got those skills? If your answer is no, please outsource it, because that is money well spent within whatever budget you feel is appropriate for that. I suppose I mentioned audio again, having just mentioned the Kickstarter before. That audio is an expensive process. If you're going to pay somebody to record your book, and deliver a performance that kind of brings that story to life in their inimitable style, that is an expensive process. That there are different rates for different audiobook narrators out there. So there are cheaper options to do that if you're prepared to sort of go with, royalty split and those kind of schemes. So it is possible, for example, to go in effectively with a narrator, and just simply they'll be paid from the royalties that book generates. But there is a risk with that, I think, in terms of you might well get a varying quality. You might get an inexperienced narrator who perhaps isn't cut out for your particular task. You might not be very good at, frankly, auditioning them and knowing what to look for as well. So, there are some things I think I would be prepared to sort of, try and push the cost down on. And I think there are other things that I wouldn't. I think for me, audio is definitely one where I'd rather pay, at least some form of cost per finished hour to get that product out there. That's why I did Kickstarter for that, because I didn't have that in my writing budget. That simply wasn't there. So I think it's worth thinking about that, because a lot of readers now do expect an audio version, and again, there can be that pressure. So as an indie author, you can think, I must have all the formats: the hardback, the ebook, the paperback, and the audio on top of all these things. Yes, it's always good to have those things, but the timing might not be right. I put up my debut in 2020. The audio for that didn't come out until 2025. In an ideal world, it would have come out in 2020, but that might be different for me when I get to book 10 compared to where I'm at book 1. So it's about sometimes thinking about when is the right time to spend that money as well. But yeah, audio, definitely an expensive proposition, needs a careful thought and planning, I'd say.
I agree. I think there are ways that you can get certain things done for less expense. Normally, time is going to be where your resource is going to go. For example, when it comes to covers, a lot of people don't realize what a cover is supposed to do. It's supposed to sell your book, particularly if people are browsing on Amazon. So if you look at the best sellers in your niche and you realize that all of the best-selling covers are super minimalistic, you don't need to spend £5,000 on a complex illustrated cover, because it's just going to be a waste of time. Even though the artwork might be very, very good, it's not doing what it's supposed to do. So I think having an awareness of what the type of cover is that you need in the first place will put you in a much better stead than thinking, I'm going to just pay this amazing illustrator for a really complex scene that's too dark and detailed to see as a thumbnail image. And then kind of once you know what you need, a lot of the graphic designers, book cover designers will have templates, and they'll just swap out a couple elements here and there. My Dragon Spirits series was a templated cover. I just really liked how the colors went together. It was kind of like a dark teal and gold together, and I really liked that. And I paid almost nothing for it because it was a template that this designer had already created. Yeah. And all she had to do was just change the image slightly and put my name and series title on it. And I get so many compliments about what a beautiful cover it is. And I'm aware, because this is what they do. They create the templates. So I think a lot of people get really put off by thinking, if the cover is good, it must be expensive. And although you do have expensive covers that are good, it's not the be all end all. So if you are skilled enough to put something together yourself, then obviously that's going to be the cheapest option. But templates are a really, really good alternative. And going through my list, so editing as well is probably the second most important thing, I would say. But writing groups and doing like a sharing of your writing with your peers, really, really good way to get like early feedback. And I think a third pair of eyes is going to make your writing better, because you can't see the wood for the trees when you've been, face down in your manuscript for months. You can't see your pitfalls. You cannot see your crutch phrases that you repeat 5 times on a page. You cannot see where your plot holes are. You cannot see where you're missing tension, because you know everything in your head. So if you find a writing group that you can join, ideally with authors of different genres to bring different things to the table, that will help. Beta readers as well. I mean, developmental edits are very expensive, and sometimes a good beta team can really help kind of strengthen the foundations of your novel before you end up paying a professional to go over it. One other thing I would say is worth investing in is formatting. I use Vellum, which is a Mac exclusive app, but you can, if you have a Windows machine, I believe you can use Mac in Cloud for it. And the amazing thing about Vellum is you don't need to pay for it until you generate something. So you can, if you have a Mac or you have Mac in Cloud, you can download it, you can put your manuscript in it, you can play around with it, see if you A, get on with it, B, like the formatting options it gives you. You can tweak it until you get it to a point where you're happy. And then depending on whether or not you want to go with that, I would say 9 times out of 10 you probably will, because Vellum is fantastic. It's worth its weight in gold. At the point of generation is when you pay for it. So there are lots of kind of free options to kind of play around with, get a feel for, see how comfortable you are using it, because a lot of people will pay a formatter. And if you just want a bog standard ebook and a bog standard paperback, you don't want a fancy, well-designed, you know, elaborate interior, which you would pay a proper typesetter for, then Vellum is really, really good. It does a range of genres, you know, from romance through fantasy, through thriller, mystery, all of them. And it makes it look like a very slick professional product. So it's worth looking into that as well. And then Tim, just to mention or to add on to what you mentioned about audio and the fact that there's a cost of that. One thing that you can also do to kind of promote yourself, promote the work, gauge the interest in an audio, you can do like a read by the author thing. And I don't mean like record it yourself, because that's a whole different sort of kettle of fish. But, you know, popping live on your social media channel, going on something like Spotlight Indie and being like, hey, I just want to do a cool little read by the author. And then you just sit and you read the first chapter or the first few pages, and you make it an engaging marketing almost. And then people are like, oh yeah, I really like the sound of that, I really want an audio. And then you can be like, well, I know I'm not a professional narrator, but if you want to hear that done by somebody who's more qualified than me, then, you know, maybe you can get pre-order going, or you can you know, start kind of building hype and building demand, and then that can make it pay for itself more quickly once you do have an audio book created. Sorry,
yeah, I'm making notes on all of this, by the way, so that's really helpful.
I'm full of ideas.
Just to chip in on a couple of those things, the formatting thing. I mean, again, we were talking about if you're good at designing, then you can design your own covers. If you're good at the technical stuff of formatting, then you can do all the formatting yourself. As it happens, I do all my formatting myself in an application called Sigil, which is completely free to use. So you start with basic text, and it's just HTML and CSS if you're technically minded. To me, that's straightforward to do. And if you are technically minded, you can produce ebooks completely free with no cost at all. And then just on the audio, I mean, it was interesting. You were talking, Lauren, about the author reading stuff out. I was experimenting with self-narrating a novella earlier this year, just to see how that went, really, to find out what was involved and how I could do it. And again, apart from buying a microphone, it was just free software. And the main thing I found is how extremely time-consuming and difficult it is, which we talked about previously. So, I mean, this was like a 20,000-word novella, and it took me months. I mean, it's just ridiculous. So what that's really taught me is that although I could do it and it didn't cost me much, I'm not sure I can read my entire three-book trilogy, you know, because that would just take the rest of my life. But there are ways of, you know, you can do that. If you want to produce a sampler or you want to start off, you can do that yourself for no particular cost.
Yeah, and of course there are authors who are also you know, audiobook narrators as well. You know, there's quite a few of them do both, and you know, do that very successfully. So again, I think it comes back to knowing what your strengths are, and like you said, Simon, sometimes finding out what they are or what they're not. You know, there's no harm at all in experimenting and trying things. You know, yeah, actually, that's one of the things I've really enjoyed about the last 5 years is I've had a go at stuff. Sometimes it's been terrible, but it doesn't really matter because I've learned, well, that's not something I'm going to do that way ever again. And you can try it a different way next time. So yeah, again, that whole freedom side of things, it can be quite fun and quite exciting.
One more thing to add. I'm really, really sorry, Alex. I know I've been rambling a lot in terms of what's worth paying money for. You know, we said cover and editing and whatnot. I think it's also worth having a way for readers keep in touch with you. And that can be just as basic as having a social media account where people can message you on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, whatever it might be, or setting up a website or a newsletter. Websites and newsletters, I would say, are slightly better because then it's the direct thing. Whereas, you could be frozen out of your Amazon account, be frozen out of your Twitter page for some reason, be locked out, and then you've kind of lost that access to that connection. Whereas your newsletter is kind of direct. Even if Amazon was to implode tomorrow, you still have people on your newsletter that you can still be like, hey, I'm still here, and this is what's going on, and when my next books are coming out and what I'm working on, and that kind of like just some way to keep that connection there, because as we mentioned earlier, that's like one of the biggest pros about being indie. So like keeping that alive. I'm not saying you have to like post every single day or anything like that. That's a different conversation, but just being open and available, I suppose.
I'd come back on that because I think that's another thing we perhaps overlooked until you brought it in, Lauren. Thank God you're here. It's the I think website is one of the most important tools you need to have as a writer in your armory, because any social media platform can change its user base, its politics. I'm across a number of different social media platforms. I'm still got my own website and my own mailing list, and I spend a lot of time on that. That's probably my luxury item. Actually, I've gone with a slightly more, again, websites. There's a whole raft of products and things out there from the cheap. If you're tech savvy, you can probably do it effectively for free, just for the hosting stuff. I am not tech savvy. I pay the premium to not worry about my website, but I really love having it as an asset, basically, and as a I suppose for me that's my home. That's where actually I'm documenting my writing journey in a more thoughtful way. Whereas on social media, it's a bit more in the moment. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's very difficult to find your posts after about a week, isn't it, generally speaking? Whereas with the website, actually I can look back at where I was at in 2020 and in 2021 and realize I knew nothing, and then in 2025 I can look at it and realize I still know nothing at all, but I knew no less nothing than I knew then. And if that's not a profound thought, I don't know what is.
Love it.
Yeah. And just to complete that thought, I mean, you can, as Tim was suggesting, you can do all that stuff for very little money if you are technically minded and could be bothered. So my newsletter, I also have a newsletter. It costs basically nothing to produce and send, just because I haven't just paid one of the sort of easier to use providers. So I quite enjoy the technical challenge of that, but that is obviously not most for many people. So you can spend little or a lot in getting that right. And similarly with a website, you can probably get free websites, I imagine. But I just pay for a bit of hosting and the rest is free, and it's quite fun, I find.
Yeah.
Well, I think we've talked about a number of different tools there, and I think that's shopping around is clearly an important thing there, because Simon, you mentioned Sigil for formatting, which is free. So that's for ebooks, is it?
Yeah, that's free.
Yeah. So we've got Sigil for formatting ebooks. Lauren, you've obviously mentioned Vellum doesn't need to be paid for so you can have a trial with it without having to pay any money. There is an alternative to Vellum, which is called Atticus, which is just a web-based thing. So that's to format ebooks and print books. That's still a one-time upfront cost, but it's not. I think it's slightly less than Vellum. But in terms of doing it yourself as well, if you wanted to format your own ebook and get a guide to that, you can look up David Gochran. I'll see if we can put some of these links in the description or what have you later. But he's got a guide to formatting your ebook. And I did that for my first book. So I just formatted it myself in a program called Calibre, I think it was. And that is incidentally why I bought Atticus. So I didn't have to do that again because I had to go in and do the HTML. But I think as well, one of the things you could do is search for open source versions of things. So one of the big programs that the publishing industry uses is called InDesign to do the PDFs for print books, and there is an open source version of that which is called Scribus, which is what I use for my PDF books, although I could use Atticus now. So shopping around and looking around is also something that can be really useful. And there are lots of mailing services talking about newsletters there that you don't have to pay until your subscribers are over a certain level. I'm on MailerLite, and you don't have to pay. They've just lowered the amount, but you don't have to pay until you're over 500 subscribers. Not a problem for me at the moment, I can assure you. So I will continue to be free. But there are definitely, if you just do a bit of searching, and as we've talked about community as well, talking with people who are already doing it or can have recommendations. And I think it's just weighing up that cost of, time is going to take time, but it could be cheap. Or you spend a little bit of money and you're not going to have to worry about it. Like I've got my site is a WordPress site hosted on SiteGround, but I have to sort of up that every few years, and I also need to look at the formatting of it, and I've got like a theme with WordPress, and I'm leaning more and more towards something like Shopify where they just do all that for you. And although it's probably slightly more month to month, I wouldn't have to worry about any of the formatting, and it just take care of all of that for me.
I'm really glad you say that, Alex, because that's exactly where I am in my life. I also use, I have exactly the same setup as you do. More and more I'm thinking, do I really want to spend my time doing this?
Yeah, exactly. It's sort of, you get one of those after a couple of years, an email saying, "Oh, your your premium subscription's running out on this thing. Do you want to renew it?" It's like, not really, but I also don't want to have to spend the time to figure out how to change it.
But and the thing is, you can do both for a bit to see how it goes. Because you've got that control. You can try setting up a different system, see if you like it, see if it works for you, and then get rid of the other one.
Yeah, and at the moment I'm using. Just to continue talking about free tools, WooCommerce as a plugin for WordPress, which is for the direct sales, which I can link to BookVault, which is why I don't have to pay anything for those sales to go through the website. And direct sales, I think, are becoming more common for authors.
We must talk more, Alex, because that's my setup as well. WooCommerce to BookVault on the WordPress on SiteGround.
Well, I think I actually ordered a book from Emma L. Adams, who was on the panel an hour ago for the Dragons one, and I ordered one from her website, and it was sent through BookVault, and it was like, oh my goodness, you can just do this. She didn't have to package this herself. This is amazing. So lots of alternatives there. Right. So I think we've covered a lot of ground. There's a lot of different things we've chatted about. I think we've kind of talked about what we can, do yourself and what you can outsource. I think, as we've discussed, it's kind of, your strengths and weaknesses, and there's alternatives to paying for a developmental editor if you, have a good team of people who are you're happy to read and get feedback from at an early stage. The last thing we wanted to chat about was free alternatives to self-publishing something to get your work out there. If you have any advice for people who, maybe they just can't afford anything, but they want to get their work out there in a way that isn't just throwing a novella up with a Microsoft Word cover. Does anybody have any good suggestions for places that people might be able to do that?
Something that's become quite popular has been platforms like Royal Road. So there is no sort of cost to putting anything on there. You don't need to worry about covers or editors or anything like that. You simply upload essentially your drafts as you write them for feedback, and whether you can naturally write very quickly or you have a lot of writing as sort of like a buffer, so you can put up a lot of chapters and kind of build a following that way. A lot of authors I know sort of started there and have then sort of branched out to Patreon and things like that to get an income that way, so that the patrons are X number of chapters ahead or books ahead. And then they'll either just keep Patreon going as just their income, or they might pull some of the books from Royal Road and whack them up on Amazon as an ebook as well. So there's loads of options sort of in terms of like serializing fiction. It depends something on the genre. I don't think it would work for everything. I know things like progression, fantasy, lit RPG, those sorts of genres are very popular there. But I mean, feasibly, it could be for anything. I haven't spent a lot of time on Royal Road, but I'm sure there are plenty of other niches and genres that people are writing. And there's no upfront costs at all. You don't need to worry about anything. And you can get feedback immediately. So something to maybe consider if what you're writing might work on that particular marketplace, I guess you could call it, platform.
Yeah, I think that's the point. There are so many different ways in which readers can discover you. I think that the biggest challenge actually is navigating, what they are and what's right for you. And I've experimented with releasing chapters of a novel through my newsletter, for example. So there are some costs to that, because obviously you've got again, I'm similar boat to you, Alex. I don't have the subscribers to be paying for that per se. But again, it's that's one way to do it. Yeah, establish a small community and then release that content to them directly. That can be quite attractive. I think patrons are a really good idea. Short story submissions to magazines, because you're kind of going back to the 1950s almost, isn't it? But that's still a legitimate way to actually get your, again, there's no upfront costs to that. You submit, you either get a story accepted or you don't. I do think actually short story writing is a really good way to hone your craft as well. So you don't necessarily need to just put out a massive 800-page novel with artwork and all the rest of it. You can start small, and sometimes that's a good that's actually a very solid strategy.
Yeah, that was exactly the point I was going to make, Tim. If you do get a short story accepted, you can always put your little bibliography on there, which will include your website or any other links you want to have so that people can find your books. You can write short stories that are in the universe of your novels that might draw readers in that just as a way of, they find a magazine, they find a story, and they can go off and find your books on your own website or whatever it may be. And then social media, obviously, I mean, it's a great thing and it's a terrible thing, but social media is a thing, and you can use the right hashtags and you can find the right communities and you can find a readership there. Again, if you want to put the time in, I suppose, but that doesn't cost anything apart from your sanity.
I would like to think that we are also readers first and foremost. I would imagine most of us read books, which is why we kind of want to write them.
Yes.
And I think if you can sort of curate your social media so you do tend to find yourself in the bookish communities a bit more, whether that's on YouTube or Instagram or in sort of bookish communities on Discord, being part of an active member of those communities anyway, because you are also excited about upcoming releases and you also want to talk about your favorite authors. If you're part of that community, it's just like having a friend group. And then if you say, well, I've actually been working on some writing, would anybody like to see it or feedback or anything? You're probably going to get early readers, alpha readers, beta readers, just because you're part of a community and they want to get behind you. So that's no cost, really. You're just doing what you would be doing anyway if you spend any amount of time online. And a lot of the YouTubers and book people will have their own communities. So it's not like you're kind of shouting into the void quite as much as it can be when you're self-published, because you are already in a dedicated space. And as long as you're authentic and not pushy, and even if you have written a 1,000-page monstrosity of an epic fantasy, don't dump that all on one person, but just be like, I want to share my first chapter, or I want to chat about a character or something like that, because those are the conversations that we have about books anyway. New releases come out, we're talking about themes, we're talking about prose, we're sharing our favorite quotes, we're chatting about our favorite characters anyway. So it's a very natural and organic way of adding your writing to the mix. And some people might want to help you by, they're a bit more tech savvy than you, they can help you with a website, or they can help you with a newsletter, or they can, kind of leaning on your support group is really, really, it can be really, really powerful. And I would say, don't be afraid to ask. Don't join communities just with the goal of sharing your stuff, because that's not very authentic and that probably won't get you very far. But if it's a natural, authentic following that you're part of, then there's no reason why you can't lean on that, because you would help them if one of these people said, oh, I'm writing something, because we all want to support each other. So that's something else to think about.
Absolutely. I think before we've rattled on, and we probably could rattle on a little bit more, I want to pick up on something you just mentioned. Well, one of the things you mentioned, Lauren, about as well as Royal Road, then going to Patreon. That is another way that you can kind of front load getting some income from your writing, I suspect it can be very, I've not tried it, but I think it's probably quite difficult to get people to give you money on Patreon if you haven't done anything yet. But as you say, as you mentioned, Lauren, like doing some Royal Road stuff and then building it up, but then potentially you could start getting some monthly money from Patreon, and then as a kind of, front loading that cost and getting some savings from that income to then pay for a cover or something like that.
Yeah. Sorry to keep talking again, but you've just reminded me. A lot of us, when we set up newsletters, will offer a reader magnet, so a free novella or short story or bonus scene or something, because why would somebody sign up to you? Why would they give you their email address? Well, you're giving them something for free, which is your writing. So in the same way with Patreon as with a newsletter or a website, make your writing free and accessible so people can get a taste of it and they can kind of understand if it's something that they would like to read more of, they'd like to support you in your journey. And then, the paid stuff would come later on. So don't be afraid to give away your writing for free. I feel like there's sometimes a thought that, I don't want to say it's selling out because that's not the right term. I can't think of it, but you're devaluing your work somehow by giving it away for free, and that's really not true. If anything, you're just sharing it, and then if people like it, they'll support you. If you continue to write books, and writing the next book is always the best way to make more money, because you never know, a book you write now could ignite a backlist from 10 years ago. So it's just, keep writing, make things free, be accessible. And I think that's the way you can kind of organically grow it, and in a sort of a snowball way.
Absolutely. So before I try and draw this to it's all amazing stuff. So please do not apologize. But is there any other points that people want to kind of mention before I try and draw this to a conclusion?
I'll just have a very quick point before you wrap up. But I think it comes back to that point about community. I have learned so much on recording this podcast now, stuff I did not know, and I've been at this for quite a long time. So don't underestimate that value of making those connections, interacting and talking to people, and don't be afraid, frankly, to ask stupid questions, because often they're not that stupid at all. They're actually really good questions. You just don't know the answer because you haven't asked it yet. So I think there's lots of ways to do this from a cost-effective point of view, and then a way to reach people effectively. So the community is part of that. The community is a massive resource of knowledge. This podcast is forming part of that, isn't it? And that's how you get on in this world, basically. So don't underestimate the power of that community.
And to say, as we like to say here at Spotlight Indie, there's no such thing as a stupid question. We've got a lot of many panels. We did one on Friday for the big indie weekend about there's no such thing as a stupid question. So do not be afraid to ask those questions. You say it's just that you don't know the answer, and I'm sure whatever the question is, we've probably all thought it, if not asked it, in our careers. Lovely. Well, thank you so much. We'll draw that to a close now. Although, as I say, we could keep going on, and there's so much to talk about around this topic. But I am eternally grateful to all of you for coming along and providing your deep wells of wisdom for us to draw on for this. So, yes, no, I won't have any shaking of the head. Thank you so much again. So if we can go, we're going to go anti-clockwise this time, and if you could just maybe let everybody know, where they can find your books, where they can sort of reach out and get in touch with you. So Simon, do you want to let everybody know about your stuff and where they can find you?
Yeah, well, as discussed, I have a website. Of course, it's Simon Kewin, my name, .co.uk, and then there's links on there to newsletters and my social media links. Social media these days is pretty much blue sky. Don't use too much else, but the website's the best place to go.
Perfect. Tim?
Yep, following that theme, I think go to my website, which is timhardieauthor.co.uk, and you'll find all my social media links there. But if you want to find me on any particular platform, I'm on X, Blue Sky, Facebook, and I'm experimenting badly with Instagram at the moment, and I really have no idea what I'm doing there. But in all those places, I'm Tim Hardie Author, so I'm very easy to find.
Perfect. And Lauren, where can people find you in your books?
Again, I have an author website, llmacrae.com. Links to everything's there. My newsletter as well. I do have a Patreon. Social media, I am on Twitter, Blue Sky, and Instagram. Probably most active on Instagram. I have a channel there as well for some exclusives. And I also share behind the scenes when I sell direct at Comic-Cons and events, if you're curious about that, but also baking, if you like cakes and cookies and things like that. I like to share everything there. So it's kind of half business, half personal.
I won't lie, when you said behind the scenes, my immediate thought went to your bakes. So they're clearly making an impact.
It's like, are you following me for books or are you following me for cakes?
Well, they're not mutually exclusive as far as I'm concerned, so a bit of both.
Fair enough.
But lovely. Yeah, please do go and check out our lovely panelists. They've been super helpful today. We're eternally grateful. For Spotlight Indie, you know where you can find us at Spotlight Indie at various social medias at spotlightindie.co.uk. Please do come back. We're not finished with the big indie weekend yet. We've got a couple more panels to go today. We've got the 4 Beardsmen of Spotlight Indie coming up at 7 p.m. today, and then the Indie Author Summer Party at 9 o'clock this evening as well. So we're going to round off the big indie weekend with a lot of celebration. So once again, thank you so much to my panelists, or our panelists. I'm being a bit too possessive there. For joining us and for providing so much wonderful information. And yes, we will see you soon at Spotlight Indie. Thank you so much.
Thank you.